Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. My name is Teresa Hobbs, and I am one of your co hosts. And I am here with the esteemed Bill Rill, who many of you know. And we're excited to talk about a really interesting topic that I think will be a little bit controversial, but I hope to handle this conversation in a very respectful and nuanced way. Before we get started, Bill, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Teresa, and this will be a lot of fun, I think. I think this is an important topic, and I think you're right. There is a lot of room here to misunderstand each other. So hopefully, I think you've laid this out really well, and hopefully the audience is open in a way that they can understand there's a fine line here that has to be walked, and I think you do a great job of presenting it and explaining it in a way that will do that for the audience.
Thank you. So, I've been thinking about this topic for a while now. I've been noticing where this plays out in our culture. I've paid attention to how this has played out in my own healing, how it plays out in the healing of clients I work with. And we happened to be in a really interesting discussion with Rebecca Biblioteca last week, where we were talking about the support groups that we're putting together for religious instruction. And there was a moment in that conversation where you and I were sort of sharing our intention for how we want these groups to go. And we were talking about how, this isn't going to be a place for people to come and just complain and vent their spleen and just go round and round and round in the trauma storm, right? We talked about how we sort of want to create a safe space for people to tell their sacred stories, but the difference between telling your sacred story and being able to process and move on from that versus getting stuck in the identity of what happened to you. And so, that conversation just sort of kept bringing that idea closer to my brain. And I really wanted to do an episode on this. So the topic today is going to be fragilization. So this is about what happens when we get stuck in the identity of what harmed us and don't get to move past it. And it has so many implications, not just personally, but again, within our culture. And so there will be moments that I sort of explain and show how that's showing up in that way. But I also want to make sure that as we have this conversation, I'm holding a lot of safe space for people to recognize how important it is to name the harm that you've experienced, to touch into the helplessness that happens through trauma, and how to meet that in a really healthy way. And also the responsibility we have as humans to hold a deep sense of compassion, patience, empathy for people who are still in the storm of their trauma. So this in no way is going to be about telling people to pull up their big girl pants or big boy pants and get on with it. Or there's so many different terms that there is out there, shit or get off the pot, stuff like that. This is going to be about how do we meet our pain, but then not get stuck there? And how do we help ourselves to move forward, both, as an individual first, but then how that's implicated in culture and how we as a culture have sort of sometimes found ourselves stuck in victimization and fragilization of our wounds. And so it'll be an interesting conversation. And any thoughts as before we get started?
I think there's a lot of spaces you can go to where you're with a group of people, they've been through a hard thing, you give them room to share the hard thing, and everyone in the room is feeding off each other, almost trauma bonding, right? And in fact, maybe that's exactly what it is trauma bonding. And that feels like great human connection. It definitely serves a purpose. But as coaches, if we don't help people to move beyond trauma bonding and begin to say, okay, what do I do with that? I've had a hard thing happen to me. What do I do with that to move forward in such a way that I can now deal with my reactivity, deal with my responses to the world, cope with what's going on in a way that's more productive? Then we as coaches wouldn't be doing our job. And as we've talked out this support group, this has been such an important thing to you. And I think it's crucial that we help people understand that trauma bonding on some part is, I think, an important part of healing is recognizing that human beings have shared experiences, they've gone through things. But the other side of that is, okay, uh, what do we want to do with that so that 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now, we're able to not get triggered, not fall into that hole of working out what's happened to us again in our head, but rather we've processed that, gained the tools and resources we needed, and moved on beyond that in such a way that's more beneficial to our life then than maybe what's going on now.
Yeah. And just, I don't know if we even have this available, but I want to let people know. I just wanted to speak to the group that we're putting together because there's only 2 spots left. We have a religious deconstruction and religious trauma support group that Bill and I have put together that's going to be every Tuesday, well, every other Tuesday um, at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And we have 15 spots that we have set aside for this particular group, and there's 2 spots left. So it starts this Tuesday, November or October 21st and 6 p.m., and it will be every other Tuesday. If we get more interest than we have space for, we will put your name on a wait list until we have enough people to start a second group. So letting people know, if you click on this link and you see that it asks you to send an email, then just send an email to me and I'll put you on a wait list. That just means that the group is now full. Anyway, I wanted to let people know about that. And then we can go ahead and get into the topic today. So, topic is fragilization and what happens when we over-identify with our wounds. And I want to first define, sorry, I'm trying to get my controls here. First, define what fragilization is. So, it's the process by which individuals or groups become organized around avoidance of discomfort, challenge, or perceived threat. So, this can happen psychologically, emotionally, or socially. And it's often in the name of safety or validation. It occurs when legitimate experiences of harm or disadvantage are repeatedly reinforced without accompanying opportunities for agency, integration, or skill building. So, over time, this can create a learned expectation that the world should accommodate one's sensitivities rather than supporting the development of inner capacity to meet life's difficulties. Because this is the thing about life, like life happens. And I say this to my clients all the time. We can't just go find our little pocket of safety and stay there forever. Life will continually give us challenges. And so what we want to do is cultivate inner resources to be able to meet. So fragilization is what happens when care can turn into overprotection or when validation can stop at empathy and never transition into empowerment. So this is what happens when trauma awareness lacks a path towards resilience. And I have been witnessing this in the trauma healing space for a lot of years, and it's been really conflicting because, to the point that when I actually, so I was first certified as a trauma recovery coach, but I always knew I was gonna go into the physical ramifications of trauma, like how trauma influences on a physical level. That was my experience and my expertise. But it was hard for me to even come out as a trauma recovery coach. I on some level, didn't even wanna use the word trauma because I felt like it was so over-identified with, and there was a helplessness, connotation to it that I didn't like. So, it's been something that I've wrestled with for a long time, and as I share a little bit more about this, you'll understand to what level it impacted me personally in both blocking my healing and in both directions. So I'll explain what that means more as we go along. But anyway, do you have anything to say just even on this first page?
You mentioned, that this isn't about telling people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and just get on with it. And, I would just acknowledge on the front end, I mean, horrible things have happened to us as human beings. And so each person out there has had things happen, some of them atrocious, right? Sexual abuse, physical violence, certain kinds of manipulation that have occurred over essentially a lifetime. And don't want to downplay that at all, but this is about giving people the ability to process that and to move on from it, and not to constantly focus on it which I think sometimes can trap us in that. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
All right, so just a few key characteristics of fragilization. So, when identity fuses with harm, so what happens with fragilization is what happened to me becomes who I am, and this you can see this again. This is my personal opinion. This doesn't mean this is wrong if this is where you find yourself. But when there's a phrase, "I'm a trauma survivor," the identity becomes, "I'm a survivor of trauma. This is like who I am." And for some people, that's helpful to a certain point, but also I think that it can get you stuck. And when I was healing from chronic illness, which by the way, a doctor would have told me what you couldn't heal from. It was a thing that you'd have for the rest of your life. But I refused to buy into that. I wanted to kind of get beyond it. And so I was essentially told, it was sort of gonna follow me forever. But when I was healing from it, the the wisdom that was, shared with me was to not identify with diagnosis, right? So, technically chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, um, and I didn't. I never said like, I was really, really careful about using words like, "Oh, my CFS," or you know what I mean? Like, trying really hard not to have it be my identity. It was something I was experiencing, it was something that was affecting me, but it wasn't. So, that can happen with trauma as well, like, I'm a trauma survivor or I'm a whatever it is. And again, as long as that serves you without becoming over-identified with it, I think that that's okay, but just be careful. Um, so avoidance, can become disguised as safety, so life becomes organized around preventing discomfort. So again, it's like you avoid all kinds of things in order to not have to deal with any discomfort. And that's the opposite of what we want. Like trauma resilience or post traumatic growth happens when we learn that we can tolerate a little bit of discomfort because life will always have moments of discomfort. And we have to realize that maybe that's okay. And by the way, these ideas at a certain point in my recovery were unfathomable. I did not want to deal with discomfort. It was a thing I did avoid. So I want people to understand that as I speak about this, I found myself in these places um, a lot. Uh, so externalized regulation, this is a big one too. So this is where safety depends on other people's behavior rather than your own internal capacity. And the problem with this, while we're healing, we definitely need co-regulation from others. We need safe people in our lives. But if we never translate that back into our own internal sense of safety, we will be reliant on other people forever. And the people just can't show up 24/7 all the time. We can't fully rely on other people. And I learned that the hard way as well. There was a time when I was learning about uh, how important it was to have co-regulation to be able to like heal trauma. And there was truth in that. But then I kept asking the question, yeah, but okay, so I have a safe person or I have a safe coach or I have a safe therapist. What happens when that person isn't there and I have something come up, right? You can't rely on those people. So the goal is eventually to develop your own capacity for self-regulation and to feel safe within. Um, Hypervigilant sensitivity. So ordinary disagreement or stress is interpreted as danger. So this can happen when we extrapolate, um, you know, somebody, disagreeing with us as being traumatizing when maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's just, okay, somebody disagreed with you. Um, or normal stress has become interpreted as, and that's where your system is no longer in a place of resilience. It's in a place of even more fragility. Um, and then lastly, there's dependency on validation. So our self-worth can hinge on being seen as the one who was harmed. So anytime a person challenges that identity, we can feel it as eroding our own self-worth or value. Any thoughts on these?
Yeah, what I would just say here, there's a season for everything. And being in any of these places is really normal. You've been through a thing that's affected you. It impacts all the future moments up to this point that have had a similar feel to them. You've gotten activated by various things in your life that are reminders of the things that occurred a long time ago. So to be in these places is a really normal thing to be in. Um, you and I, our main goal as coaches, at least my 2 cents, and it's so much tied into, I think, Buddhism. It's so much tied into internal family systems, which I'll mention here in a second. But our job as coaches are to help people sit with, to some extent, the feelings that come up and what they've experienced, and to give them ways not to run away from it, not to give it a narrative that gives them some comfort but doesn't ever give them a chance to move beyond it. Our job is to give them things that help them sit with that discomfort, realize it's maybe not as bad as what they've told themselves or what the world has said or what the experience has helped them define it as, and help them now sort of reassign it in a way that it doesn't impact them the way it currently is. And internal family systems does this. You pointed out, I can't always have help from the outside world. And what eternal family systems does is it teaches you how to work with all the parts of you.
Yeah, you called it eternal family systems, just so you know.
Okay, internal. If I did, I'm sorry. I thought
No,
I said.
I'm making a joke about that because of the church. Anyway, some Freudian slip maybe.
Yeah, internal family systems, the whole goal is that we talk to the parts inside of ourselves and we be the grounded parental figure that validates those parts. It's like what you just felt isn't wrong and the way you want to show up isn't wrong, but to help them, you're the one who's sort of self-soothing yourself. And you learn how to let that part speak its truth, express what it wants to do in the world, why it feels the way it does, what it's experienced. And you give it room to express all of that. But then you also are the healthy, grounded, wise parental figure who helps the part move past it, acknowledging all that it is and it has experience and what it wants to do. And I think that's really a big key of what we do in coaching. We don't always call it internal family systems. We call it different things, but it really is helping the person deal with their shit without needing the abuser to say they're sorry, without needing the abuser, without needing the parent to validate what happened, without needing the friend to apologize, or without needing the trauma to somehow go away and to have never happened in the first place. That's a lot, but I just want to same thing you're saying, which is these are normal stages that people go through. We spend time in each of these for a season. The goal of coaching or therapy is to help us get to a place past that. And so anyway, I say all of that to set the tone for what you're also communicating.
I love everything you said there. It's that and IFS or EFS. I don't mean to tease you, but I thought that was so interesting. Internal family systems is the ultimate reparenting process. It helps us to provide the parts inside of us, the things they never got, from our original parent. And it fundamentally sets us up as having the ability to have more self-compassion. And I think it's beautiful. And so, like, as you were saying, like, as coaches, we essentially sort of try to hold that same space where we're not trying to force people to be like, well, I think you're through that phase now. You need to jump to this phase. Like, everybody has their own timeline and process for how they do this, and it's never forced. It's never something that I would ever have to set the timeline for another person. But I can sort of, like, essentially what I do as a coach is I will share my own experience and illustrate for people where I was along that path so that they can find themselves feeling normalized, and also see how to get through from one phase to another. So
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing about that, which is to give them an example. If I were to go back 10 years ago, something would have happened in this moment. It would have, I would have been activated inside because it would have been similar to an argument or a reaction to something that happened a long time ago. And my reaction, where that came from, would have been this, I'll say wounded inner child, but it could come at any season in our life where we get traumatized. But that part wants to get vindication. It wants to be right. It wants to feel safe, whatever the reasons are. And it shows up the way it does. But the way it shows up is often an unhealthy reaction meant to take things from where I'm getting bumped into to the other side of the spectrum where I'm the one now lashing out to have some sort of control over the situation. And when those things would have happened a decade ago, I would have told you that's me. That's me who's wounded. That's me who's reacting. In the here and now, when I get activated in the exact same way because of this same kind of thing that happened a long time ago, I now recognize there's a part of me that got bumped into. It wants to respond this way. And rather than thinking that's me and me lashing out at the world, now I can sit still and in my head I'll say compartmentalize, but I think it's more complex than that. But for the sake of the discussion, I'll compartmentalize the grounded whole me self and that part of me which has a legitimate wound that is feeling activated. And I can, while I'm talking to the person I'm communicating with, working out this disagreement or conflict, I can be aware of what this part is saying and I can validate it. I can acknowledge like that is so fair and legitimate what you're feeling right now. And I honor that that's a way that we could show up right now. And that would push back against whatever hurt you're feeling. And I'll address that when I get a second. But right now I'm going to handle this conflict with this person in such a way that I can be proud of how I'm showing up. I can realize that I'm not adding any major, more significant harm to the world or the situation. And I'll take care of this wounded part of me either simultaneously or at a later point if this needs my focus. And that may sound all messy and complex, but I'll say that really is the kind of tools that coaching or therapy, when it's working at its best, is giving. It's giving you the chance to take a sacred pause, not to let that part rule the moment, to address the situation in a way that is responsible and healthy, and which doesn't disregard that part, because that's not healthy either. To acknowledge that part is good and serves a purpose and has done you good and protected you for a long time. But now you have the ability to see it as detached from you in a way. It's not exactly you. It carries a part of the things that happened to you for your betterment. And you're almost like a mediator in a situation, and being the mediator who comes from a much more healthy place, you're able to now make decisions in these moments that don't take the harm from the past long ago and now send ripples out into the universe, causing more harm to yourself or those around you.
I love that. And you just illustrated again that our wounded parts aren't our identity. They're a piece of us. They're there. They need to be seen and heard and held and honored. But then make sure that we're choosing from, we're learning to connect to another part of us that has that's more grounded, that's more resourced, that can handle and manage all those big feelings. So I love that. So this is just, to talk about like why this conversation matters, why the idea of recognizing fragilization matters. It's because when fragilization becomes cultural, resilience declines and polarization grows. And this is again something I'm seeing very much in our culture right now. There's so much polarization. And there are so many people that are on two different camps that have embedded themselves in an identity of victimization in many different ways. And then it becomes about, no, my victimization is greater than your victimization. My harm is greater than your harm. And it's almost like a competition for who was harmed more, and therefore who gets more, I don't know, validation or respect or understanding, whatever it is. And I feel like that's doing us a disservice. Also, we mistake comfort for healing, and then we lose tolerance for different stress or nuance, different stress or nuance. So again, this goes back to like, if we haven't built up enough tolerance to feel into differences or to handle stress or discomfort, just like you were saying, Bill, you've developed the ability to, when a wound gets activated, slow down and show up a certain way, right? And what's happening what we see now is people get activated in their wound and they just immediately lash out, like they can't tolerate that. Um, Over accommodation can reinforce helplessness instead of restoring agency. So when we're continually feeling helpless, we aren't able to make the best choices for ourselves, and we get stifled and shut down, and we're not able to move out into the world anymore. Avoidance can be a short-term kindness that also ends up being a long-term cage. So there's a lot of ramifications to finding ourselves in this place of helplessness, and fragilization.
Yeah, and what I'll add here, is that, if I go back in time, if we go back 500 years ago, society was built in such a way that there was a lot less tolerance for people on the margins, or people who were different, or people who experienced a thing that was calling for us as a society to slow down, hold space for them, give them a chance to be heard about what it is that they're dealing with. And you can see that everywhere. I mean, you can see that just going back 100 years and looking at civil rights, for instance. But it happens with anyone who's different. Every little small subgroup of people who have uh, uh, a deficit of privilege are dismissed and unacknowledged and marginalized further by our society. And so I want to, on one hand, just grant that we've made so much significant progress. We have a long way to go, no doubt. But we've made so much significant progress in starting to see all kinds of humans as just human, and to try to make space that whether they're gay, whether they're black, whether they're female, whether they have a physical challenge, whatever it is, that we've made more accommodation, more space, more validation. And in no way are what we pointing to is that being a negative. That's a positive. But there are other parts of that are tied up in this where we go too far. And I would want the audience to recognize there is this line, and that line is it's not just a simple line. There's things we're doing good and bad on both sides of that line, but we've got to get better at. And I'll just note, compared to what it was 500 years ago, the pendulum has swung much closer to where it needs to be, but maybe in some ways it's swung too far. And where it's swung too far, it is catering to a cultural approach that allows a person who's been hurt to just stay there, getting the validation, getting the acceptance, being told that they're not bad, it's okay that they're the way they are, but in such a way that disempowers them or takes away their ability to continue to grow and progress. And I think it's just important here to note that we're always shifting and changing in our society, and lots of those changes are great, but sometimes in order to get it right, we do have to swing a little too far first. And part
Yeah,
of this conversation today is to deal with that, to acknowledge that some of the areas where maybe we've swung too far, and those ways aren't really helpful to the person who's been hurt.
agreed. I love that. Okay, so this is just like we were talking about before. There is a time and a place where honoring the wound that we have is really, really important. So, this is about why honoring the wound is essential. So, healing requires truth telling. And before the nervous system can integrate, it needs to feel seen and validated in its pain. So, ignoring, minimizing, or rushing past what hurts keeps the wound frozen in time. And to honor the wound is to acknowledge the moment where power, control, or safety was lost without judgment or spiritual bypassing. So, you can't just be like, ah, well, it happened, no big deal, and bypass it. So I'm just going to go through these, and then I'm going to share a short story about my experience. So, number one is recognition is regulation. So when the body feels believed, defenses are going to soften. The limbic system can finally downshift because the implicit message changes from I'm still in danger to I am understood and supported. This is the beginning of co-regulation and trust repair. Number 2 is validation restores dignity. So to honor the wound is to say what happened to you mattered. This transforms shame into coherence. Instead of organizing around the question, what's wrong with me, the system begins to organize around what happened to me and how can I heal. Number 3 is the wound holds wisdom. Within every injury is information that our needs, limits, and value about our needs, limits, and values. Honoring pain allows us to reclaim those boundaries that we're consciously, to reclaim boundaries consciously rather than to reenact them unconsciously. Number 4 is denial breeds fragility. When we bypass pain to appear strong, we create brittle resilience, which is strength built on suppression rather than integration. So true resilience arises from feeling the truth fully and staying connected through it. That one reminds me of there are people I know, this is very common in narcissistic personality disorder, where there is a reaction to vulnerability. So they want to remain invulnerable. And so they will pretend like nothing bothers them, pretend like nothing has ever, they don't like to ever feel victimized. And so they deny that there's ever a wound, but it never gets addressed, it never gets healed. And in reality, those people are actually more fragile than if they had just honored what's there, because every time you get close to their wound, they will react and then deny over and over again. Fascinating thing. Number 5 is honoring is not indulging. So validation is the bridge. It is not the destination. The goal isn't to stay identified with the wound, but to move through it into greater capacity, empathy, and self-leadership. And what I want to share around this from my personal journey is that when I was chronically ill and I had what they call an invisible illness, so doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me. I was incredibly sick. I was bedbound, housebound, couldn't get out of the house, couldn't work. My whole life just shut down. And there were people in my life that were really concerned about me, were concerned about how it affected my parents who had to care for me. And they could see that there was a mind body connection, but they didn't know how to communicate that in a non-judgmental way. And so they became very invalidating to my experience, to the amount of fear and confusion and terror I was going through. And they gave messages of, this is not what you think it is. It's all in your head. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're fine. And it was so harmful to me. Like it didn't help me to move on. It didn't help me to feel safe. It made me feel like I was still stuck in danger. So this goes up to this number 1, where recognition is regulation. So because I wasn't recognized in what I was going through, and there wasn't enough compassion or patience or empathy, I felt like my system was still in danger. And now I felt like there was a threat from the people who didn't believe me. So this is again why it's so important to validating to people, to have patience, to have empathy, to have kindness, and allow people to move through the process without denying their experience. Again, I'm not trying to promote people, to just be like, oh, you're so fragile. You must have a problem. You need to get over this. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm more, as we talk more about this, I want to just put out there for each individual as you're going through your process, that there is more beyond the story of what happened, and that there is a way to move in it and fully meet it and then move beyond it. Does that make sense? And do you have any thoughts about that?
So the other thing that I would want to add to this, and I don't want to go off into the weeds here because this is an entirely different conversation, which I hope we'll have an episode someday on this. But your last one, you said honoring is not indulging. We've all seen situations where in a friend group, a guy or a girl goes back to his friends and he says, this thing happened. Can you believe how so-and-so treated me? And in certain situations, the response is that the reality is that both sides had some part to play. It wasn't really that other person's fault entirely. But in order to support your friend, you indulge them. You tell them that it's all that other person's fault. I can't believe that happened to you. And we do that sometimes. We go so far as to show love and friendship to somebody that we give them a false idea of where the balance is in the situation.
Mhm.
And I don't want to address that. I only want to say that this is not that. So while you acknowledge that one side of the coin is that people do not recognize or validate that things happen to you that were hurtful or unhealthy, traumatic. The other side of the coin is this is not just about telling you that it's all the world's fault and and to lift you up in that in such a way that you get to sit in that forever. Um, anyway, that's the other side of the
Yeah.
coin. I think that's important for people to recognize that this process is about balance, which I think is a fine line to walk, and it's about not only honoring and recognizing the things that have happened to us, but also giving us a reasonable, healthy view of what happened to us in such a way to recognize that we also play a part in our healing, in our coping with it.
Yeah, and just as in response to the example you gave, let's say that situation comes up and you do have someone who comes to you and they're, it's a you can see that there's both sides to the story. What it means to validate a person's experience is to say, "Oh my god, that must have felt so difficult." So instead of saying like, "You're totally right and they were such a yada yada yada," you're meeting them in what they're feeling and you're inviting them to be able to meet the feeling, the experience of it, not necessarily the narrative or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And so that's where being validated is important. And invalidating would be, denying their experience or denying the impact of it. So yeah,
Yep. Sorry, I just sneezed, so hopefully that didn't make it on. But
that's okay. Sneezing is acceptable. Is my sound better?
yeah, everything's great.
Okay. All right. So these are just some different concepts around I don't know where good care goes sideways. So there's an idea out there called concept creep, and this was put together by Nick Haslam. And the idea is essentially over time, psychology and culture have broadened the definitions of harm, trauma, and abuse. This has raised awareness, which is a good thing, but it's also blurred distinctions between distress and danger. So when everything painful is labeled trauma, it becomes harder to distinguish between a nervous system in crisis and one that's in the normal process of adaptation. So the consequence of this is that it can encourage people to identify as injured rather than adaptive, weakening confidence in their own resilience. And, you know, he sort of illustrates that back in the day, the DSM-5, I don't even think they had like trauma. The word trauma was used to describe somebody who had a physical trauma. And then eventually it got picked up by psychologists to infer psychological harm or trauma, which was then at the time defined as somebody who had gone through a natural disaster, had, experienced some horrific violent attack on some level, things of that nature. And then the concept has creeped into now, and again, I think this is a good thing. I don't think this is bad. We now define trauma as not what happened to you, but how you responded to the thing that happened to you. And I think that that's legitimate. I think that that's important because I think that everybody has a different response to things. Um, but it's kind of come into the lexicon so much now that people will use it, with hyperbole, like, "Oh, I was, I had this, I had this horrible shake at the shake store, and it was so gross and it was traumatizing." You know what I mean? Like people will sort of expand it to mean things that are just, I don't know, inconveniences at this point, and that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah, every small negativity becomes a trauma.
Yeah. The other thing is trigger warnings. So there was a 2020 study that found that trigger warnings do not reduce anxiety and may actually increase it in some individuals. So it also suggested that warnings can lead to trauma survivors viewing their trauma as more central to their identity. And the research concluded that practices like trigger warnings should be thoroughly vetted before being implemented. And again, I know that like people do this as a kindness, but it reinforces that, like, oh my gosh, you're too fragile to hear this word. Like, we need to now protect everybody at all costs and put a big banner up that lets people know the subject matter we're about to talk about. And I think that that reinforces fragility because you can't control everything. You can't protect yourself from every trigger that's connected to your trauma. And I think projecting the idea that we can is kind of insane, really. And it turns out that it's not helpful anyway. So this thing that we thought was going to be good and helpful ends up to be that it's at very best not doesn't protect people at all, and at worst, it actually reinforces that people are helpless. And I don't think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I run into this from time to time. You and I were talking about this the other day, but in creating content that often, at least at times, covers, for instance, the sexual abuse that occurs within the religious system that I came out of. When I do episodes, RFM, Radio Free Mormon, and I, my co-host in another piece of content that I create, we're often questioning whether we should include a trigger warning or not. And at times when we haven't, we've had people in the audience who have said, "Man, I wish that would have came with a trigger warning." Other moments, I'm fully realizing that if I include a trigger warning, it makes the topic more salacious, which in turn may actually add more anxiety, more reactivity to the topic as we cover it. It becomes, I think, sometimes a difficult choice whether to have one or whether not to. And there is some healthy standards around this. And so, anybody out there, if you're in some place in your life where you're debating whether to have a trigger warning or not, I would suggest taking just a moment and consulting some of the standards that are seen out there about whether you do or don't, and why it might be beneficial to not do so, and why in certain moments it really is the healthy response to have one. And that too is not just a cut and dry, easy topic of anytime we cover a hard thing, have a trigger warning.
So I think it's warranted to have a trigger warning if you are about to show graphic images of some kind, for sure. Letting people know that they can, move away from it. I think it depends on how graphic your language is going to be, but we've gotten to the point now that people can't use certain words. For example, on YouTube videos, I'm constantly seeing anytime someone uses the word rape or murder or suicide, that it's blurred out or used as some other word in place of it. It's very weird. So that's only been in the last few years. So I think it's gotten to the point where we're trying to protect people, but I think it's actually just maintaining this fear. And it's actually creating more of a reaction around that word than would have been normally.
Yeah, you're pointing to the topic that you've got here, fragilization. So you
Yeah.
are fragilizing somebody if you tell their mind, their subconscious, if you tell their body, again, I'm going to use the word subconscious, but it's not picked up on an intellectual level. You're justifying that, hey, anytime we use even a word to describe a horrific act, we're leaving room that you are allowed to be activated and to for you to create distance between you and having to deal with the topic. And there may be instances where that's beneficial to the person, but I think that there's a lot of ways that this might just make people more sensitive, which is only making the issue worse and worse.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the short-term avoidance that we think is protective ends up maintaining more fragile, more sensitivity. It perpetuates the thing that we're trying to fix. Um, there's this other term called safetyism, and this comes from the book called The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this book, or maybe just paraphrase what they're talking about in it. This comes from chapter 1 in their book, but, they've defined this idea called safetyism, where it's a social trend where emotional safety becomes the highest value above truth, above curiosity, or growth. So institutions and individuals begin to eliminate all potential discomfort rather than to help people build tolerance for it. The consequence of this is that we lose stress inoculation and the exposure, which is the exposure that builds psychological strength. The nervous system will start to learn that avoidance is the survival strategy. Um, and that is not a good thing. And so this is the book. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And I think they have a website called thecoddling.com or thecoddling.org, something like that. Um, but this is an excerpt where they talk about safe spaces. So I'm just going to take a minute and read through this because it's really interesting. And this is just to give you an idea of how things can go a little bit too far and how this can show up in our culture in a way, and you can determine for yourself whether or not you feel this is a positive or a negative thing. So it goes like this. Few Americans had ever heard of a safe space in an academic sense until March of 2015, when the New York Times published an essay by Judith Shulevitz about a safe space created by students at Brown University. The students were preparing for an upcoming debate between two feminist authors, Wendy McElroy and Jessica Valenti, on rape culture, which was the concept that prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing sexual assault and abuse. Proponents of the idea, like Valenti, argue that misogyny is endemic to American culture, and in such a world, sexual assault is considered a lesser crime. We can all see, especially in the Me Too era, that sexual abuse is far too common. But does that make for a rape culture? It seems an idea worthy of debate. McElroy disputes the claim that America is a rape culture, and to illustrate her argument, she contrasts the United States with countries in which rape is endemic and tolerated. For example, in parts of Afghanistan, women are married against their will, they are murdered for men's honor, they are raped. And when they are raped, they are arrested for it, and they are shunned by their family afterward. She says, now that's a rape culture. McElroy has firsthand experience of sexual violence. She told the audience at Brown that she was brutally raped as a teenager, and as an adult, she was so badly beaten by a boyfriend that it left her blind in one eye. She believes it is untrue and unhelpful to tell American women that they live in a rape culture. But what if some of Brown University students believe that America is a rape culture? Should McElroy be allowed to challenge their belief, or would that challenge put them in danger? A Brown student explained to Shulevitz, bringing in a speaker like that could serve to invalidate people's experiences. It could be damaging, she said. The logic seems to be that some Brown students believe that America is a rape culture, and for some of them, this belief is based in part on their own lived experience. I'm sorry, I need to move this because I can't see the slide. Their own lived experience of, hang on. I have lost my way. Oh, their own lived experience of sexual assault. Pardon me. If during the debate McElroy were to tell them that that America is not a rape culture, she could be taken to be saying that their personal experiences are invalid as grounds for the assertion that America is a rape culture. That could be painful to hear, but should college students interpret emotional pain as a sign that they are in danger? Illustrating concept creep and the expansion of safety to include emotional comfort, the student quoted above, along with other Brown students, attempted to get McElroy disinvited from the debate in order to protect her peers from such damage. That effort failed, but in response, the president of Brown, Christina Paxson, announced that she disagreed with McElroy and that during the debate, the college would hold a competing talk about rape culture without debate, so students could hear about how America is a rape culture without being confronted by different views. The competing talk didn't entirely solve the problem, however. Any student who chose to attend the main debate could still be triggered by the presence of McElroy on campus and, on the assumption that students are fragile rather than anti-fragile, re-traumatized. So the student quoted above worked with the other Brown students to create a safe space where anyone who felt triggered could recuperate and get help. The room was equipped with cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play Doh, calming music, pillows, blankets, and a video of frolicking puppies, as well as students and staff members purportedly trained to deal with trauma. But the threat wasn't just the reactivation of painful personal memories, it was also the threat to students' beliefs. One student who sought out the safe space put it this way: I was feeling bombarded by a lot of viewpoints that really go against my dearly and closely held beliefs.
There is so much there. First, I want to say that this is something that systems play on, unhealthy systems that is. So, for instance, in Mormonism, it tells its followers that information can be dangerous, that any information that causes you to experience cognitive dissonance can't be trusted. And here we are at a university which is supposed to be open dialogue. There needs to be competing ideas. There needs to be a safe space for ideas to really bump into each other hard, because these are the places of higher learning where we try to figure these things out. And yet you have these two people who have these competing views. There's enough merit to both sides that the debate is seen as useful. It's invited to occur. And again, people's sensitivities are certainly reasonable, especially for those who have been harmed over the course of their life by sexual or physical abuse. And yet, the way this is handled, and there are parts of this I think that are handled great, but there are parts of this where we go like, you know what, I don't like that idea. It causes too much activation, so this person needs to be barred from even having the debate with the other person. It's such a strange thing that we as a culture want to get ideas as far away from us as possible. Based on that last line, I was feeling bombarded by a lot of viewpoints that really go against my dearly and closely held beliefs. In order to not experience cognitive dissonance, in order to hang on to beliefs that are central to our identity, we now have parts of our society that encourage us to simply get away from the debate, and rather than risk having our mind changed, to avoid information that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and to stay in your echo chamber,
Yeah.
which is what we do, which is interesting because this generation, I think this would be considered generation Gen Z, but this generation was the one that had the most, well, I mean, obviously generations after this now have, but have had the most access to social media and have grown up in this sort of worldview that gets echoed over and over again. And it's interesting how it's playing out in university cultures, school cultures, where again, there is this idea. I think it's really true. There's this idea of safetyism that we have to avoid discomfort at all costs. And while that avoids discomfort, it doesn't inoculate people to have stress tolerance. And so people are actually becoming less and less capable of handling stress and managing things. And things outside of them are becoming bigger and bigger, larger monsters that they need to hide away from. And this is not a good thing. This does not create resilience. This does not create a society that can manage and handle life. And this is why I'm talking about this, because I think these are the consequences that are really detrimental to us as a society.
Yeah.
And
I'm
yeah,
thinking about the future. If we coddle, and I don't mean that offensively, if we coddle people to a significant degree and we allow them to isolate away from data, experiences, information, if we allow people to go like, "Oh, that makes me uncomfortable. I want to stay away from that conversation. I want to stay away from having that issue talked about," then we're preventing ourselves from being able to learn things, to get informed about things, to realize that whatever beliefs or ideas we hold, that they're untrue. And that is a much worse future than to teach each other to deal with discomfort and to sit in spaces where disagreement is occurring and where your closely held beliefs and ideas are being challenged.
Yeah, and the university could have responded in a whole different way, or the students could have responded in a whole different way. They didn't know enough to do this. But had they created had they put out information that uh, competing ideas are healthy for growth, that sitting with new ideas is helps you develop a greater sense of your own truth and autonomy, that staying curious and being in that curious space is really healthy and helpful. Like if they had purported those ideas, then that would have actually given these students a lot more resilience to whatever came up if they were to watch that debate, right? They're hearing two different sides. They're going into the debate, staying open and curious. That puts them in a place where they're not actually going to be traumatized at all. They're going to be open and curious. They're not going to be taking any of the information and holding it against their own identity. They're going to be curious about it. So anyway, there's different ways that that could have been handled in a way that would have actually been more beneficial to those students. But that's what's happening on campuses. That's what's happening in all these spaces. And it seems on the outside to be really kind and empathetic and helpful, but fundamentally it is causing more harm in the long run.
Yeah, and in unhealthy groups or systems, it is highly promoted that you stay away from the critics, you stay away from the alternative ideas. And uh, regardless of whether you're Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, whether you're in a religion or you've deconstructed it and you've left, we all have to be constantly on guard of finding ourselves in uh, old echo chambers and moving on to new echo chambers. And it's easy when we used to be a thing and we've been challenged in certain ways in our life and we've uh, adapted to new information. So we've made changes. So on that end, we've encountered new information. We realize the merit of that information. We've changed our mind about things. But then, and that's all great. But then sometimes that moves us just into the other camp and thinking now that camp has all the truth and all the right.
Yep.
And it's just another echo chamber.
100%. Yep. So interesting. All right. Can I put this back on there? There we go. Thank you. I just want to touch on these really quickly. These are just the psychological mechanisms behind fragilization. So number one is learned helplessness. This is when repeated experiences of powerlessness or uncontrollable stress lead an individual to stop trying to change outcomes, even when opportunities for control are restored. This is when the nervous system shuts down to such a degree that there's full collapse, and a person just doesn't feel like they have any power. They can't come out of that. And it really requires a lot of time and small repeated experiences of successful action to rewire person's connection to age, because they literally just feel like they have no age. And again, the kinds of messages we have out in the culture, when they reinforce this over and over again, a person can get to the place where they feel learned. That is not helpful. Number two is tendency for interpersonal victimhood, TIV. This is a stable personality orientation in which individuals clinically perceive themselves as victims. It includes four components. One is the need for recognition, moral elitism, lack of empathy for others' suffering, and rumination. So they persistent focus on offenses or injustices. And TIV predicts lower forgiveness, greater interpersonal conflict, and resentment. And when left unchecked, it erodes relational trust and reinforces isolation. This is the
I just
Go
want to
ahead.
put in here. You said clinically perceive themselves as victims. It's chronically, and I just want to note because the print is a little small. This is your brain has done something in such a way to deal with things that now you use that as a defense mechanism or a protective mechanism over and over and over again.
Yeah, and this is common in people who have high narcissistic traits, where they are constantly the victim and they are constantly needing people to validate and reinforce that they're the best or they're okay or that they've been victimized. A notable person who this shows up in is Trump. If you think about all of these things, he presents like this all the time, and there aren't a lot of people who can miss that. And again, whether you like Trump or don't like Trump, whatever, he's just an interesting example. Um, Number 3 is experiential avoidance and psychological inflexibility. This is the attempt to suppress or escape unwanted internal experiences, so your thoughts, emotions, and sensations, rather than making space for them. And avoidance strengthens what it resists. I know a lot of people have heard the term, what you resist persists, and it's very true. So this will maintain anxiety, it will prevent exposure-based learning, and it will lead to rigidity. So flexibility, which is the ability to hold discomfort while moving towards your values, is the antidote. And then number 4 is over identification and self fusion. So, common in trauma recovery when one sense of self fuses with pain or diagnosis. I am my trauma. This limits identity expansion and maintains chronic dysregulation. And healing involves decoupling identity from experience. Um, this is a slide on fragilization and entitlement. And this was also interesting because I was looking through some different experiments that people have done that set people up. So essentially, when individuals perceive themselves as victims, they can feel more entitled to moral leniency or special treatment. It's like I've suffered, so the rules just don't apply to me. And in one study, they had participants that were primed to recall an injustice, and then they watched their behavior afterward, and they concluded that when they're primed to recall an injustice, they were more likely to justify unethical behavior afterwards. So victimization can activate moral licensing, which is the unconscious belief that being wronged grants permission to act out or expect accommodation. I don't know if you've seen this with other people or anyone in your life.
I experienced this recently with someone. So I have a personal relationship with someone that I've known for a long, long time. And that person I felt had done an injustice towards me. And I can't remember what the exact phrase is, but it's something like assault from the victim position. There's a phrase, and I don't remember exactly what it is, but it's this idea that, and it comes so natural that if somebody wrongs us, and in this situation, I felt like that person had wronged me. And so then I felt justified in holding them to task and berating them and condemning their behavior in front of others and letting them have it essentially. And we do this, that there's this idea that because something happened to us, as you pointed out, it feels like it's permission to now give some shit to the other person. And all we're doing is just committing another harm that from their point of view is someone else being unhealthy. If we're going to be better humans, we've got to do something different than that.
Yeah. I'm going to sort of, if you want to read through this, you can pause this and read through this, but I want to get to the next slide. So fragility meets entitlement. When unhealed pain meets cultural validation, fragility can evolve into a sense of moral superiority or demand for universal accommodation. So again, like you're saying, demanding others manage your triggers, using victim status to avoid accountability, or equating discomfort with harm. And this is again where fragilization comes in. If you just happen to think that feeling uncomfortable equates to harm, you've lost the ability to tolerate discomfort. And now you have this comes into that concept creep where you are labeling discomfort as trauma. And those two are not equal. And you are actually invalidating another person's trauma when you expand it to mean discomfort. On a societal scale, these patterns we can trust, they polarize communities and they erode resilience. Societies become risk averse, innovation declines, and dialogue fractures. I think that we can see a lot of that already. Let's see. Parallel research. There are moral cultural studies by Campbell and Manning in 2018 show a rise in victimhood culture where moral status derives from perceived oppression. When victimhood becomes virtue, growth becomes betrayal. And I've actually seen this too, and I felt this actually when I was healing from from chronic fatigue syndrome, when I was healing from illness, I felt like as I was moving on, there was, like, this fear of, like, leaving others behind, and I felt like people were sort of angry at me for no longer being in the sick club, for no longer being in the victim place. Not that the people I interacted with held that belief, but there is almost kind of an identity of, um, of, like, this is where I am, this is what I'm dealing with, and for us to sort of be on the same level, you have to stay in the muck with me. And I didn't wanna be in the muck anymore. I wanted to move out of the muck, and as I did that, I left some people behind who weren't quite ready to step out of it yet. And I felt like I betrayed people, and I think people felt that way as well. So, um, recognizing legitimate pain must be balanced with cultivating capacity, accountability, and shared responsibility. Otherwise, empathy devolves into entitlement and justice turns performative. This is the other thing I wanted to say on entitlement. Let me come back here for a second. So, I want to share a personal story around this. I was taking a course from a well known somatic practitioner, and I have a lot of respect for this person. I think this person's amazing. They are an immigrant themselves, they are a person of color, and they were trying to create a container in this course that they were presenting. It was a live course where it was inclusive, it was trauma informed, it was respectful of everyone there, and people felt safe to show up exactly as they were. And they also wanted the space to sort of be one where marginalized people were given more of a voice. And so at the beginning of the course, when we would have like uh, uh, well, actually, I think she presented the whole thing live. So she presented the whole thing live, and then she had a Q&A afterwards. And she told people that ahead of time that the Q&A um, would be set up in a way where marginalized people would their questions would be taken first. And it was a really interesting experience. I was perfectly fine with that. I thought, okay, great. I was totally on board. But in theory, it seemed really cool. In practice, it was really weird because she then had to decide from a Zoom video, like a little, your little Zoom square, who who was more marginalized? Like, who had so marginalization meant, a person of color, somebody from the LGBTQIA place, um, disabled people, but I couldn't figure out from those little pictures who was what. And so it got really weird and awkward, with her trying to prioritize people and leaving other people with their hands raised, just sitting there, not being seen. It was such a strange experience, and I learned in that moment, even though she meant to do good, it actually it created a really strange feeling in the space, and it created I felt like I was walking on eggshells, and I felt really embarrassed for the people who had their hands up who weren't getting called on because they were perceived to be this white, uh, hetero, whatever it was. They were assumed to be not marginalized. So that was strange. And then another thing that happened in that group was that there was a person, who was non-binary who felt offended, even though this practitioner did everything they could to try to portray the experience of people who've been marginalized in a very healthy and responsible way. There was still something that was translated through their communication that didn't sit right with this person, and this person got very triggered and then, left the conversation. And people were talking about it in the chat, and it was a whole big to-do. And so the practitioner, let everybody know, "I will reach out to this person, yada, yada, yada." So, she did, and then she got back to everybody and let us know that she had had a conversation, and she, offered to pay this person for their time so that she could sit with uh, their trigger and their reaction to what she said and learn better so that she could show up better for everybody. And I just thought that was, I don't know, To me, that went way too far. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, does that feel normal? She was essentially paying somebody because they were offended.
You had shared this story with me before. We talked about this maybe, I don't know, a week ago or so. It's a strange thing. I mean, first off, I think the practitioner, that's the word I'll use, but she went out of her way to try to accommodate this person's hurt and experience. I thought that was kind, but I think we all have to figure out, especially when people are doing their best, people are genuinely trying to be cognizant of how they approach conversations. I think we've gotta, this goes into that fragilization. We've gotta figure out how to sit with our own discomfort around how other people approach the world and life. And I think so long as we feel like we deserve to have our unique view catered to and the other person's unique view is bad and in trouble, I think we're going to struggle with this. And there are places where it crosses lines, and there are places where attention does have to be drawn to those who are saying things out of ignorance, that are causing hurt in the world. But I think I often wonder if the pendulum has swung too far the other way in some instances.
Yeah, and I was so happy by all of the inclusive content she brought forward. I would have loved for her to have, and even if she wanted to magnify marginalized voices, that would have been amazing. I would have been very supportive of that. But the way it happened was awkward. She could have chosen people ahead of time and said, "These are the questions, I'm gonna field questions from people from certain groups," and she could have made those choices ahead of time and then called on those people so that nobody was left sitting with their hand up and not being seen, because what she did was she magnified another human being, and allowed them to feel very unseen and not valued. It was very weird, and that didn't need to happen. So, there could have been a way that she could have done it to both support marginalized voices and also to not leave people in a space where they may have felt unseen and humiliated. And then in addition, she could have handled the situation with the person quietly, but instead she recorded the entire conversation and then presented that as part of the course. And it was, to me, when I watched it, find I didn't find a lot of value. I found somebody holding space for somebody who couldn't manage their own feelings. And I felt like that was actually a disservice to people, and it showed that if you can't manage your own feelings around a topic, that you are going to be rewarded and that you are entitled to have that reward. And so that's why I'm bringing this story into this idea that we're talking about around entitlement, because I do think it then sets people up to believe that anytime they're offended, somebody owes them. And I just don't think that's the case. I think that that's going in the wrong direction. So we want to call out injustice 100%, but having your feelings hurt and not having your perception on your gender identity um, presented in the exact right words that you think it needs to be is not one of those. So,
Yeah, I mean, the whole goal of what we're trying to do is to help people have more develop more capacity to sit with what they're feeling, to be able to examine where that comes from and what goes into that without having to assign uh, an untrue narrative or to make other assignments to it, and to be able to have the tools and resources to now process those feelings, do something with them, and not just get catered to. Again, there are healthy moments where people just need to be heard for what's happened. But again, as you pointed out, this story seems to be one that went too far.
okay. So this is one of my favorite topics because I'm so into the mind body connection. And it's more powerful than anybody could ever understand. And there are so many really cool books on it. a lot of things that we thought were just physiological mechanisms have now been proven to have a mind-body connection. So there's a really cool book out there called The Expectation Effect. I talk to Bill about it all the time. I just listened to it for the second time because it's just so interesting. They talk about so many different studies in there where how we perceive the world, consciously or unconsciously, shifts how our physiological body can respond, how our emotions can respond, everything from how we digest and metabolize food based on how we perceive the food to the longevity, like how we perceive ourselves uh, in life can shift how long we live and how healthy we are as we age. It's a fascinating book. So this ties into this idea of fragilization because if we perceive ourselves as being victimized, as being helpless, then that that sort of leads the way for how we will show up in the world and how we will feel and experience life. So, um, what we expect shapes how we feel. Our beliefs, expectations, and internal narratives serve as a kind of lens or filter through which our nervous system experiences sensation, pain, recovery, and emotion. In many cases, expectation alone can trigger physiological cascades that mimic or amplify healing. And I teach this to my clients all the time because so many people come to me with the after effects of what trauma or stress, which can manifest into these physiological uh, conditions. So, illness or pain or all kinds of different symptoms. And I have to teach people to understand how to repattern uh, their brain so that the brain will turn off these symptoms because the brain is a prediction machine and it will get stuck in these loops, perceiving something as dangerous and then turning on a symptom in response. And so it's this process of like unlearning that loop. But why this matters for fragilization and healing is that expectation is a lever. And when we expect fragility, our body learns to manifest fragility. When we expect capacity, our nervous system is more willing to stretch. Healing is partly meaning work. So the narratives that we carry about trauma, about safety and identity become part of the biological loop. They either tighten or expand our system's tolerance. This is 100% true. External validation is powerful, but internal expectation magnifies or limits that potency. If we outsource all safety, we become passive receivers rather than active participants in our healing. And in working on fragilization, one of our tasks is recalibrating expectations from I must be protected from all discomfort to I can bear certain discomforts and grow through them. And I'll just give an example of this for myself. One of the last things that I have tried to shift in my healing process has been exercise. I Part of what happens with chronic fatigue syndrome or ME is that you have this thing called post-exertional malaise. They call it PEAK. And it's when you do any type of exertion, you will feel just horrendous. It's like you have the flu for days after. It's this horrible experience, and it makes you afraid to move. It makes you afraid to exercise. And so it was one of the last things I actually addressed because I could get along through the day. I could do housework, I could do yard work, stuff like that. But I hadn't started a formal exercise process. And I was afraid of it. Like I was afraid of my body getting really sore. I was afraid of crashing. I was afraid of I was afraid of having asthma attacks. I was afraid of a lot of different things. And so I was sort of like delaying that. And it wasn't until I moved to St. George that I actually started to walk. I mean, walking seems like a silly thing, but I had to start really small. And so my I had to repattern that movement was safe, and I had to do it by exposing myself to the thing that felt scary. But I did that in small increments. So at first, I think I started walking around the apartment complex, and from there, I started walking around the neighborhood, and then I started walking on trails, and these were all like pretty flat trails. But then when we moved to where we are now, I suddenly I'm at a higher altitude. It's like 5,200 feet here, something like that. And we have these other trails and we have mountains around us and there's all these hiking areas. And so when we first moved here, I was, I remember the first trail had like this really steep climb, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. I was afraid of it, but I, walked up the hill slowly and got to the top of it and then turned around and came back. And then got to the point where I walked up and went much further. And each time I progressed and each time my system adapted and got a new message that I can do this. This is okay. This is safe. And now I'm hiking again. And I didn't know if I would ever get that back. We're hiking off trail at this point. I get done with a walk or a hike and I want to go further. And it's amazing how my body has adjusted, not by, if I would have continued to protect myself and never walk, I would never have gained this capacity back. It was only by doing the thing that felt scary in the first place that I did. And that doesn't mean you have to go out and do a 5-mile hike in one day. It starts really, really small. So that was something I wanted to share and illustrate about how you start implementing this. And then it's a doable thing, and it doesn't have to be, you don't have to push yourself beyond tolerance.
You and I were talking about this the other day. So I want to ask you a question, but I want to just note, I mean, there's this idea out there called The Secret, and there's books and documentaries and everything. And it's this idea that you tell yourself a thing and it will manifest. I want to be a millionaire. And then if you just say it every day and you think the thought, it will manifest in your life. And personally, I think that's woo-woo nonsense. But what you're pointing to is a truth. And I don't want people to dismiss it as a version of The Secret,
Mhm.
because there's something to when you set an expectation for yourself about your health, about your health, about some other thing. And I was going to ask you if you would share the story you shared with me about the house cleaners and what they were told and how things showed up for them.
Oh, yeah. So they did a study and on a group of maids in, I think they were hotel maids, and they sat them down and they split them into 2 groups. So one group, they sat down and basically told them how beneficial exercise was, how amazing it was, and all the benefits they would have, and how many calories they were burning when they exercised, or no, how many calories they were burning when they did just the work, their everyday work. So they were like, vacuuming is this many calories, and just by you working every day, you are actually meeting the guidelines for how much exercise can lead to weight loss and can lead to your body, getting stronger and all this kind of stuff. So they primed them with that knowledge, and the other group they didn't tell anything to, and they took measurements of their strength and their I believe it was like their weight and their all kinds of different markers. And then they, let them go about their work. And I don't know if it was like a month or 2 later, they went back and checked them again. And the people who'd been told that this exercise they were already doing was benefiting them and was, going to help them lose weight, or was qualified for enough exercise to be effective at weight loss, those people actually lost weight. They had, like, as a group, as a whole, they ended up having better biomarkers, like all these kinds of things that, and they did nothing different. They didn't go out and exercise outside of that. They did the same job as the other people. But because they were primed in their mind to have this idea, and again, I don't think these people are even thinking of it consciously. It was just primed in their consciousness. It changed how their body allocated resources. And that's what happens with the brain. It's not some magical thing. They go into it in the expectation effect, talking about why this actually happened. Because the brain is the master regulator of hormones, of your neurotransmitters, of your caloric control. Basically, it decides how much it should, how many resources it should allow you to be released at different times, because it's constantly trying to make sure that that you're not utilizing too many resources. So, but that's based on the brain's knowledge of what it's dealing with at any given time. So if the brain perceives that it's in need of hoarding resources, it's gonna turn your metabolism dial at a certain point. But if it believes that it can, that it's safe to let go of resources, it's gonna allow you to burn more calories. So there's so many different really cool aspects of this, and the book is a really interesting book. But it's not woo woo. It's not It's not the secret. It's not about just telling yourself you believe something and then having the world, move and accommodate you. It's about it's a it's about how you believe and what your brain thinks allows you to either move towards or away from things. And a lot of this again is on a completely unconscious level. So it's super cool. And even the book talks about how, you can't just change your mind or suddenly believe something and have all these things happen. This is where part of what the book suggests is if you have sort of a negative expectation about something, you're not just going to automatically change your mind and be like, oh, this is a positive thing. It's not about positive psychology or um, overlaying a negative belief with a positive belief. Sometimes it's about just being open and curious and learning new data, new understanding about something. And then rather than trying to make yourself believe that it's positive, just at least um, disconnecting the negative. So this is where mindfulness sort of plays a role. I teach people how to release their their entrenched belief about something and to just be open and curious and start observing things without layers of judgment or fear or whatever on top of it. And that brings it into this place of neutrality where they can sort of disconnect the negative association and eventually form a new association based on a more curious, open, non-judgmental place. And it's amazing how it does rewire your brain to perceive uh, perceive your environment, perceive your inner experience differently, and start to rewire new, more positive or healthy responses to things.
Yeah, and folks could try this. I mean, there's little things you could do to just sense how this works, at least in a really simplified way. So if I do some sort of heavy exertion and now my heart's racing, I'm breathing hard. It's one thing to stop and just go, okay, I just want to calm down. I just want to calm down. And you can do that, and that will bring your system down faster than if you do nothing. Also, if you put your uh, mental intention on, I'm going to slow my heart rate down as much as possible, you'll have greater success of getting your heart rate down doing that than if you just tell yourself, like, hey, it's time to relax. I just exerted myself. I once read, this was maybe a decade ago. I read a bunch of news articles. So it was like scientific research stuff, but there were several articles in like Psychology Today and various places that talked about how our organs have a consciousness to them. And all of these different body systems, including our mind, are all in connection with each other. And that by that those organs have a consciousness to them, and that there are ways in which we can be present with that and know that that's happening, that we can send signals from our intention of our head to various organs to perform certain ways. And it's not like you can do this dramatic thing, but there are these tiny little subtle shifts that over the course of 6 months, a year, 5 years could be a pretty big difference. It's like if two airplanes are just flying 1 degree different from each other, and now we check on them at the end of the flight and they're in two totally different places. You can, through your expectations, prime your body to respond differently to the stimuli of the world and your own internal things going on. And that could be a world of difference 6 months or a year down the road.
Yeah, and from the perspective of fragilization, if you have primed yourself to believe that stress is bad or um, being, I don't know, not having your truth validated is traumatizing or bad, and then you're having the culture reflecting that back to you, you are then going to be associating somebody not agreeing with you or not affirming you in some way as some horrendous trauma. And your system's going to then have a response as if it's a horrendous trauma. Like there are people that will perceive something as so toxic and negative that maybe it's just a stress or maybe it's just a discomfort. And they've gotten to the point that they've turned it into this massive monster in their head. And then their body responds because their brain is priming to see that thing is so dangerous, not just challenging or stressful or uncomfortable, but literally dangerous. And then they have a physiological response to that thing as if it were a true threat. And so changing our mindset about things to be like, okay, that's a normal stress that happens in life, and stress is safe, stress is okay. I can manage the discomfort of stress that comes up. Um, then your relationship with that thing shifts. You're no longer seeing it as this massive threat. You're seeing it as something that's a little bit challenging, and you're able to respond to that in a healthy way. So that's the difference. So that's where, again, I'm using this concept of the expectation effects to just be mindful of how we frame things, and sometimes reframing what is happening in our environment from something that's truly dangerous to something that might just be uncomfortable or a little stressful, can really shift how we physiologically respond to it. It gives us better adaptation, gives us the ability to have more agency and choice, and to not get knocked down by things that really aren't that much of a problem. So,
100%.
quickly, just want to touch on this idea of locus of control and fragilization. So, locus of control is the idea. So, it's a basically you either believe that you are responsible for most of what happens to you by your ability to respond to things. I mean, obviously, there are many things we have no control over. So, an internal locus of control is somebody who believes that for the most part, they are in charge of what happens to them. Their choices impact, how they move through life, and they feel like they have some control over how their life plays out. People that have an external of control are more likely to believe that things outside of them are controlling what happens to them. So they feel like it's, the outside world has the impact and dictates, how their life plays out. So I wanted to tie this into this idea of fragilization because when you have an external locus of control, that worldview will prime the nervous system for helplessness and hypervigilance because safety depends on external circumstances aligning perfectly, which is something we can't control. So patterns that can emerge with an external locus of control is waiting for others to change before we can feel okay, needing validation, permission, or approval to act, blaming systems or people instead of identifying personal leverage points, avoiding challenges because it's not fair or they caused it, and getting stuck in the blame game, relying on external soothing instead of self regulation. So, over time, this can reinforce that idea of learned helplessness, which is the belief that nothing we do changes our outcomes. When safety depends on control of the outside world, we become perpetually unsafe. And then internal locus of control. And by the way, you really want sort of a balance. You want to be able to say to yourself, there are things outside of me that I can't control, but what are the things that I do have power over? And knowing that you have, by your ability to respond instead of reacting to things, that you have the ability to direct your life in positive ways. So, the internal locus of control, by contrast, our sense of agency is located within ourselves. We believe that our own power of influence in what happens to us doesn't mean denying injustice or personal limits. It means reclaiming our ability to choose how we respond, interpret, and act in the face of those realities. Patterns that emerge from an internal locus of control are recognizing our power to regulate emotions and perceptions, taking ownership of choices without collapsing into self blame, seeing challenge as an opportunity for skill building and self trust, and acting from values rather than waiting for ideal conditions. Internally anchored people still feel pain, but they recover faster because they don't confuse suffering with powerlessness. They orient towards agency. What can I influence right now? Instead of control, how can I make it all stop?
Yeah, the only thing I'll say here, and it's again, I don't want to go off into the weeds, but I just want to note a lot of unhealthy systems, especially religious systems, point to agency, that word in particular, that you have this freedom to choose, but then teach you that the authorities of that system have their beliefs, their thoughts, their teachings trump your internal gut intuition. And what I think you're advocating here is a really healthy approach to the word agency, which is that you develop within you this internal authority that you trust your intuition as having merit. You trust your gut about what it says is best for you, and you develop and grow that ability to have that voice that's inside of you, to recognize that it's trying to tell you things, and to trust it for what's best for you as you navigate your life, as you navigate trying to seek out safety, as you navigate trying to be accountable to the good and the bad that you do in the world, rather than letting others speak for you. So this external locus of control and internal locus of control is a big deal to me. And that as we exit binary thinking patterns, dualistic thinking patterns, black and white thinking, one of the things we develop in moving into a more complex, nuanced world is that we develop a much stronger internal locus of control. And I just love that you're pointing out that that really is a deep sense of agency and
Yeah.
using agency in a healthy way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're gonna just move into how do we meet the helplessness inside? How do we meet our sense of victimization? So helplessness is at the root of trauma, but healing doesn't come from never feeling helpless again. It comes from learning to resource helplessness internally, again, coming back to like coming home to yourself instead of outsourcing safety entirely to other people. When your safety is out there, you have no power or control over it. When your safety becomes accessible internally, you do have power and control. So, number one is why external validation alone isn't enough. External support is vital in early stages. We need co-regulation, empathy, and witnesses to our pain. This is where we talked about that in the beginning, like meeting the pain, meeting the wound is really important. However, if we stay dependent on external soothing, the nervous system will never learn self-trust. We remain organized around needing someone else to help us calm down, to fix us, or to make us feel safe. And this is what happens if we didn't get enough healthy attunement as children. Will never develop the ability to self-regulate on our own. And in order to heal that, we have to sort of um, we have to heal our attachment wounds, and we have to move from being anxiously attached or avoidantly attached or disorganized in our attachment to understanding that there is a place inside of us where we can come home to that will offer uh, that healthy, compassionate, kind, and safe parent to all the parts of us that feel unresourced. Um, Internal resourcing restores agency. So when we meet helplessness from within, we begin to reclaim internal authority. Instead of seeking rescue, we offer ourselves grounded regulation, which is true safety. Internal resourcing might look like practicing mindful, curious noticing. Um, it's funny, I was putting this together the other day, and I was just as I started coming into this part of like, how do we actually resource ourselves? I was just talking about some of these different practices, and immediately I started yawning. Like my system started to let go, and I was like, oh wow, I've been a little uptight through this. So just a simple mindful, curious noticing, which could be something as simple as like, okay, I'm sitting in this chair, I can feel it underneath me, I can feel it behind my back, look around my space. Wow, I'm safe. I'm actually okay in this moment, and just feel ourself where we are. It's amazing how much it can slow your system down and bring you back into safety. And just even slowing the breath, grounding through the senses, offering a kind internal voice. These acts are going to signal that I can be with myself when things feel uncomfortable or unbearable. And it's a really important skill to be able to build. Number three is reparenting the helpless self. So in trauma recovery, this is the moment we shift from someone please save me to I can care for the part of me that feels unsafe. That internal shift will build resilience, self-respect, and coherence. It's not self-reliance and isolation. It's a secure base within that's capable of both connection and independence. So we call that concept interdependent. Like we're not supposed to be a dependent person dependent on everybody else or wholly independent on our own. We're supposed to be interdependent where we can lean on people, but also come back home to ourselves. Um, Number 4 is co-regulation becomes mutual, not dependent. When we've resourced helplessness internally, connection with others becomes a choice rather than a necessity for stability. We can receive support without collapsing into it or needing others to manage our states. And this creates healthier reciprocal relationships. If you are always requiring somebody else to regulate you or comfort you or um, keep you feeling safe, you're never gonna have a reciprocal healthy relationship. It's not possible. You have to be able to self-attune, to hold space for yourself, and to, manage your own reactions before you can ever enter into a truly reciprocal and healthy person. Um, Again, practices for internal resourcing, grounding through sensory orientation and breath awareness, naming the helpless part gently. So you can say, as Bill was talking about when he was talking about internal family systems, something in me feels small and powerless right now, right? You can connect to that part of you that's feeling the helplessness and hold some compassion for it, name it. Um, I'm doing right now, placing a hand on the body and anchoring your attention in warmth or a heartbeat. I love to feel like the warmth of my hand on my chest. To me, that's very, very grounding and settling. Some people like to feel heartbeats, some people don't. Bill hates the Bill hates feeling heartbeats. He's like, oh, grosses him out.
Mm-mm.
Um, Imagining a compassionate, capable self staying with the helpless part. So you can use visualization, or you can imagine a wise person. It could be your own self. It could be an imaginary person. It could be someone you know. Some people utilize characters like Mr. Rogers and imagine that character meeting their young child parts or their helpless parts, and that can be really resourcing. um, Practicing small moments of self-soothing before reaching outward. So even if as you're building capacity for this, you may not be able to fully resource yourself, and that's okay. This happens in stages. So you can take 10 seconds at first and be like, all right, I'm going to be with myself first before I reach out for that co-regulation. Then maybe next time it's 20 seconds that you sit with yourself before reaching out. And you keep building up tolerance for the discomfort, and you keep practicing coming home and coming inward until it starts to feel more normal, and that becomes a thing for first. And eventually you get to the place sometimes where you don't need that co-regulation. Somatically sensing into the body with curiosity and neutrality. Again, that's where, maybe you're feeling anxious, maybe you're feeling a really yucky feeling inside, and you drop into it rather than thinking, oh my gosh, this is dangerous. I hate this feeling. It's so bad. You come into it from a mindful place, which is like, oh, interesting. I'm going to be curious about what if this isn't bad or wrong? What if this is just a sensation? And wow, it feels really fluttery, or it feels like, things zipping around my chest or whatever it is. And you can just follow it mindfully and curiously without needing to fix it, without making it wrong, without judging it. Transforms the entire experience you have with that sense. That's how you can even repattern anxiety and create safety around anxiety. And the anxiety comes and goes. It has this arc, and it doesn't stay embedded in your system when you're arguing with anxiety, when you're constantly hyper fixated on it and thinking that it's dangerous and wrong. It just builds and builds, and then you never can sort of turn the volume down on it.
Yeah.
Go
I'll just
ahead.
yeah, I'll just note, going back through your list, external validation alone isn't enough. It does have to be an inner work that you're doing. You have to meet your parts. You have to meet the you of before that's had things happen. You said internal resourcing restores agency, reparenting the helpless self. Again, right goes right along with that. But the co-regulation becomes mutual, not dependent. And then this last one, these are the somatic exercises that uh, you and I, as we venture into coaching, of course, you've been doing that for some time now. But one of the things you do that's really great is you help your clients to learn these somatic exercises so that they can begin to presence themselves, calm themselves down, soothe themselves, and be able to get out of the fight or flight part of the brain, get back into the grounded self that's at that frontal cortex. And it's in those moments that you can think logically and rationally about what's going on around you, and that's going to be the best chance you have to respond to the world as things are happening in real time. Things hit us. I'll use the word trigger. Things trigger us. We get activated. When we get activated, we leave that grounded self. We go into that fight or flight space of our mind. And in that place, we are just reactionary. We're just trying to do whatever our brain's done a million times before to get safety back, to get some sense, get rid of some sense of powerlessness. And it's in being able to be present and aware that you can send signals to your brain and body that it's okay to leave fight or flight to get back into the grounded self. And from there, you're going to just make much better decisions for how you move forward in things and how you respond to the world rather than react to it.
Absolutely. And when you are able to start utilizing some of these practices, you then start to feel incredibly empowered because you realize, oh, I just regulated myself. I didn't have to rely on somebody. I found a place in me that could provide a signal of safety and that could bring down that fear, that activation, that anger, whatever it is. And so it ends up making you feel a lot more empowered. Um, We're going kind of long here, so I'm going to move through these a little bit quicker, but this is from fragility to flexibility. So, fragilization equals avoidance, dependence, and rigidity. Integration equals choice, capacity, and responsiveness. So, number one is the nervous system's flexibility principle. Resilience is not the absence of stress, but the ability to move fluidly between activation and calm. Healthy systems expand and contract, they bend without breaking. And this is a really cool thing that I don't think I understood for a long time as I was learning about the nervous system. We naturally are constantly moving in between expansion and contraction, expansion and contraction. And that is a healthy, flexible nervous system. What happens with trauma is we will get stuck. Our system will freeze and it will contract. And that moving between expansion and contraction no longer happen because the body and the nervous system is holding back um, whatever activation happened or whatever uh, protective response was supported. So, or defense response, I'll call it. If we needed to run or fight and we didn't have the ability to, our system can get stuck in this freeze response, which is like, I can't run and I can't fight. So, all this energy of needing to escape this threat is stuck inside. And that prevents our system from being able to flexibly go in and out of contraction, expansion, start to become afraid of it. So, we just get stuck. And so, we want to be able to invite that back in. And to be able to invite that back in, we have to learn how to work with our system and tolerate um, the sense of activation that can sort of come up in us. And so, again, it's reframing what sensation is, reframing what activation is, reframing what anxiety is, reframing what discomfort is. All of that helps us to be able to move back into an engagement with our nervous system where we can literally witness it and witness the energy moving in and out and get back into that flow again. And then it starts to feel really normal again. You don't, there's a point where it can start to feel really uncomfortable when you're learning to tolerate those sensations without freaking out and feeling like it's a really bad thing. But that happens through normalization, that happens through a safe other, that happens through borrowing another person's nervous system when they're feeling calm and connected. And it happens through the courage to venture into that and to move towards what feels scary rather than continuing to hold that contracted.
Yeah, this makes me think of, and I want to be sensitive here. As you and I chat about this work, and as I'm aware, of the types of skills that you've accrued and the things you specialize in to help people. People respond to those. I'm thinking of like the safe and sound protocol, where you use certain decibel levels or sound levels within music to help people learn to trust that there is safety when when their environment they're perceiving a signal that it is unsafe, for instance. And when people are affected by that music that has certain sounds in it, various people will, the immediate reaction is they're feeling a disruption inside their system. Some of them trust the process and they push through that in some way, and others retreat because it feels so threatening to them. And I just want to note that the degree to which we feel fragility may impact that when helpful resources come in, they do cause something different to happen, right? Like if we're going to overcome whatever it is we're feeling, we need a coach, we need a therapist, we're going to take on some modality of help, some resource or tool. Stretching ourselves into that might be an immense amount of discomfort for us, and some people will retreat from that discomfort and some will lean in. And what we're hoping to do through our work is to give you the capacity that you feel an increased amount of safety leaning in rather than being the person who retreats.
Yeah, 100%. I love that you said that. And it happens through there's a couple of different layers of this. One is psychoeducation. And a huge thing that I provide to my clients is I help them understand what's happening to them, what it actually means, what those signals that they're feeling mean, what help them understand the narrative and the story by letting them share it and tell it and reflecting back different things. But also, um, once they understand how trauma is playing out in their system and how it slowly unwinds, and we give a new explanation for the sensation or the feeling that comes up in them that makes them want to retreat and go back down, and we help them understand that, like, okay, no, we're going to move towards it, because as freeze thaws, right, this is freeze in its contracted state, it thaws and thaws and thaws, and then all this sort of suppressed energy or activation can start to come up to be released in the system. And for people, and that happens in the presence of safety. So when you are met with safety, that's when the system learns it can let go. But as it let goes, sometimes feelings come up. It can be old emotions. It can be energy that didn't get to move through. It can be sometimes anger or fight energy that got thwarted. It can be grief or helplessness. So many different feelings and emotions and sensations can emerge through the body as this is happening. But if you give people an understanding of what that is, it can help them to be less afraid of it. You're reframing it, you're helping them understand, you're giving them context. And also, the other important part is that we work within a person's toleration. So if somebody is really sensitized and really afraid, this is number 2. So building flexibility through graded exposure. So you're going to gradually, in a titrated way, expose people to manageable challenges that teach the body that I can handle this. So if you give somebody something that's way too big, they're never going to get to the point of I can handle this. So give people something really, really small where they feel like they can meet it, they can handle it, and they can move through it. And that starts to build more confidence in the process. And that person is able to let go of that braced internal orientation and move towards the system opening up again and handling the surge of energy or emotions or whatever. And you get better at tolerating that to the point that you're like, oh, okay, this is life. Sometimes I feel sad. Sometimes I feel angry. Sometimes I feel afraid. And I know how to work with that now. And I can let my system, I can let my nervous system and my brain and my meaning go through this expansion contraction process without it getting stuck and locked down again. So, yeah. Anyway, does that make sense?
Yeah, the work that people are going to do when they face the disruptions that are showing up in their life that they don't want to continue into the future, everyone's going to have to sit with, be present with, feeling things that they have avoided in the past or had a workaround for. And so now, if you're going to do the work, inner work is going to require that you sit with feelings that you have figured out a workaround in the past up to this moment. I'm trying to think what to say about that, but you're going to have to feel things that maybe you've avoided before. And we can certainly do that in a space, as you said, a space of safety, rather than having to wing it out in the world the next time something bumps into you and you're feeling a reaction taking place. In a in a coaching space or in a therapist space, there's a safe space to feel that, explore that, think about it. That's a better environment for it. But if you're really going to grow, you're going to have to get to a place where you sit with your feelings and are present with them.
Yeah, because like you said, avoidance, right here it says avoidance prevents this learning loop. It prevents you from gaining that confidence that you can manage the thing, and you do that over time. And again, it goes back to that example I gave of just building your capacity for exercise, like me going out and realizing, oh, I can do this. I have the ability to exercise. I couldn't have just gone straight to hiking. I went to walking around the apartment complex first, and that's how we build that. Um,
It's
there's
impressive.
Sorry, go
It's
ahead.
it's impressive. You and I met a year ago, and you were just coming out of, to some degree, the health issues that you had dealt with, and your capacity was at a certain level. And you and I start dating, and we do things, and it's just so fascinating to have watched you. In the beginning, we would have walked 100 yards, and you would have voiced that you were meeting the pinnacle of your capacity, and we would have to step away from that activity. And now you're the one pushing me. We'll go on, an hour and 15-minute hike and walk, what is 7,000 steps or 2.5 miles, 3 mile, whatever it is. And we'll cover a certain amount of ground that if I would have asked you to do that when we first moved to Cedar City, for instance, you would have thought that was impossible, and it would have felt impossible to you. You would have hit your wall and you would have said, I can't do this. But knowing that, the expectation effect, knowing that you could do more if you just created a space where that was possible. And suddenly, little by little, your body builds endurance, your body builds capacity, your body pushes past what it thinks is its limit. It experiences severe discomfort, but you trust the process, you lean in, and 2 weeks later, you're walking or hiking even further than that.
Yeah. And the same thing happens on an emotional level. So we build tolerance and capacity and expansion emotionally as well to tolerate what can feel at first as really uncomfortable. And then it starts to feel less so and less so and less so. So it's
Yeah.
really cool. And that's the invitation for people to, rather than to avoidance doesn't help you. Avoidance keeps it in place and makes you actually more vulnerable and feel more fragile. It's a constant feeling of like, well, you're helpless, you can't do it. And so if you can just start at something so, so small that's within your toleration. For some people who, I work with, they're bed bound. The small thing would be sitting up. I mean, it doesn't have to be some giant grand thing. It's small incremental steps that eventually lead to bigger things. So um number 3 is mindful differentiation. We need to learn to distinguish between true threat, which requires protection, and emotional discomfort, which requires presence. I love this one because it's so true. Like there are times we're really going to have to like utilize some protective response if there is a physical or true threat, and but emotional discomfort is not a true threat. And so when that comes up, we need to learn how to find presence, how to meet ourselves in an emotional way, and being able to sort of figure that out is security. Um, Number 4 is integration practices, which again we've talked about: somatic tracking, since tracking your sensations without judgment, emotional labeling and reappraisal, naming what is there reduces the intensity of it, micro doses of stress followed by recovery. This is where like cold exposure can really be really helpful for people, because what it shows your system is like we can be a little bit stressed and then we can get out of it and our system can recover. Um, Being able to have difficult conversations. When you avoid difficult conversations, you just reinforce that you reinforce the stress, and you you reinforce that you can't handle a thing. Well, that's another thing I wanted to share too is this reminds me. So my grandmother died in 2022, and I wasn't 100%. I was just I think that's the year I did my coaching certification. So I was coming out of chronic illness, but I still had a lot of things going on, and I was so avoidant of public speaking, like, you don't even know. I am not a public speaker, and, um and I have a lot of associations with being in a Mormon church, and my grandmother was very Mormon, and her funeral was going to be held in a Mormon chapel, and I hadn't even stepped into one for years, and it was a weird thing because there was some part of me that wanted to honor my grandmother. Or actually, I'm gonna tell you there's this that I wanna talk about first. Um, Hang on. I'm gonna step back for a second. Okay, so there's this concept called it comes from acceptance and commitment therapy, where you use values-based behavior, which is choosing what matters even when it's uncomfortable. And this is an interesting take on how to decide what to move towards. Um, so Genuine freedom isn't the absence of pain, it's the ability to take meaningful action in the presence of it. So we can't always control what we feel, but we can control what we move towards. When we act in alignment with our deepest values, could be compassion, honesty, growth is a big value, integrity, love. Our nervous system is going to learn that discomfort doesn't have to dictate our choices. So, fragilization trains us to organize around avoiding pain, and values based behavior trains us to organize around pursuing meaning. Each time we choose what matters instead of what feels safest, we rewire the brain for flexibility, courage, and coherence. So, in practice, this is what got me thinking of this, and I'm sort of shared the story too soon. But instead of avoiding the difficult conversation, you're going to speak the truth with care because connection matters. Instead of shutting down after failure, you're going to try again because growth matters, right? So the values are care, and because care is or connection, and because care and connection are important, you're going to have that difficult conversation. If you value growth, you're going to remind yourself that failure is okay and you can keep trying over and over again. You're going to step up again and again. If you value self-respect, you are rather than constantly trying to people please to avoid conflict, you're gonna set a boundary because self-respect is one of your highest values. And so this is a really cool way to kind of figure out, um, how to maybe motivate yourself into acting in accordance with your values because um, acting from values rather than fear changes the physiology. It brings coherence between your heart, your brain, and your body. And the system learns that discomfort is safe when it's in service of purpose. And this is where I want to share the story about my grandmother. So she passed away. I loved her very dearly and I wanted to honor her. So, like, the value that I was working from was I love my grandmother. I think she's an incredible person, and I want to speak and talk about her life. And I wanted to honor her, but I was also scared shitless. I didn't want to go into that church. I didn't want to speak in front of people. I didn't think I was good at it. And I knew I would be really nervous. But I leaned into it because it was so important to me and I was willing to actually feel the discomfort of that and because it was in service of something greater. And so I did. I got up there. I shared a story about my grandmother in front of a whole bunch of people, and I was shaking the whole time before I was so nervous, but I did fine. And in the end, I think I blacked out. I don't know. I don't remember a lot, but I got through it. And by the end, I felt elated. I felt like I had so much more confidence. And it actually made me want to speak more. It made me feel like, oh my God, I really can do that. That wasn't that bad. Um, so it was really, really cool, and if I had just avoided, I never would have gotten that, and it was part of what's actually taught me how to move towards things that are scary, and I have done that over and over and over again. Every time something seems, overwhelming or too much, I've gained this confidence that, like, "No, if I can meet that, I know that I'm gonna actually expand my capacity. I'm gonna feel more confident and better in the world." And so I've been practicing that for the last several years now, and I have not regretted it once.
Yeah, I think you're back to the expectation effect. If you expect that you will move towards growth, that you'll move towards progress, you'll move towards greater capacity. I think you have a significantly better chance of those things coming into your life.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know. I think this is one of the last slides. Yes, it is. Okay, cool. The way forward, integration, agency, and collective maturity. So, honoring pain without organizing around it. We can acknowledge our stories of harm without letting them deny our identity. Sorry, define our identity. I am wearing the wrong glasses today. Healing is remembering we are more than what happened to us. That's a really beautiful thing. Like really, really getting to the point that recognizing that we're more than what happened to us. We don't have to identify with the thing that happened to us. We need to meet it. We need to acknowledge it. We need to be met in it, but we don't have to perpetuate it into an identity. Number two is move from self protection to self leadership. So safety that never evolves into agency becomes a cage. True empowerment means taking responsibility for what's within our control and releasing what. Number three here is collective, talking about the collective implications. So communities thrive when they cultivate both compassion and resilience. Again, this is where like we have our own journey about our own things where we may try to challenge ourselves to move beyond the identity and move into the wound and learn to self-regulate and all that stuff. But as we show up for others along their journeys, so vital for us to have compassion for other people to validate their experiences. It doesn't mean you have to validate someone's narrative, but you can validate the internal experience of how they felt inside and how they responded to that. You can have patience and compassion and empathy for people. And at the same time, that doesn't mean we have to perpetuate somebody else's fragility. So there is a balance there. But I'll always sort of err on the side of kindness and but also be mindful of when you may be perpetuating somebody else's helplessness. Um, Systems built solely around protection breed dependence and division. Again, we've talked about that where yeah, if we're overly sensitive to the identity kind of things, we are just creating more division and uh, more dependence and more fragilization. Um, Cultures that balance empathy with accountability grow stronger, wiser, and more connected. I guess that's a really good word, accountability. And I think there's a way to to hold accountability that's kind and not invalidating. If that's yeah, I don't know. What's your thought on that? Just out of curiosity.
When I look at number 3 there, collective implications, again, I think this is a great way to synopsize the different places we went into in the conversation. Um, Compassion, so again, validation on one hand, but on the other, you need some resistance. You need to be presented different ideas. You need to be challenged in ways that uh, surpass your beliefs about your capacity. Um, you have to be challenged. Systems built solely around protection breed dependence and division. You need to be involved in your world around you in a way that at least puts some people in your space that are different than you or that push you or that bump into you a little bit. You can't just hide away from everything because yes, that might give you a greater sense of safety, but you're not going to be challenged enough that you're going to experience the growth that I'm hopeful that all of us will want to gravitate towards. And then the last one here, cultures that balance empathy with accountability, right? We do want to have empathy. We do want to go like, oh my goodness, I've felt things like that before, and I can understand that this was so hard. I can only imagine how difficult that was. But also not to make that a way that we just coddle someone, but that we give them opportunities to expand and to grow. But I think these are really big concepts for the second half of life. And I always want to be encouraging people to progress, to grow, develop, learn. And a lot of that comes with self accountability, looking in the mirror and saying, look, the world has done these things. Some of these things have hurt a lot. But if I'm going to move past that, if I'm going to develop skills and resources that I move beyond that, I'm going to have to look in the mirror and just be accountable to the person I see, uh, rather than pointing to the rest of the world having some responsibility for it.
Yeah. So true. I love that. Number 4, the last one is just how to find balance. So notice where you've become overprotective with yourself. You can practice one small act of approach each day. So that could be a conversation, a boundary, or a challenge. And I promise you, these things are actually going to make you feel more safe inside. Every time, again, you move towards something, you learn how to reclaim your own sense of self, your own boundaries, and learn how to hold a state of healthy protection that's based on more about moving outward instead of attracting a shut down, frozen response. Um, Lastly, you can replace "I can't handle this" with "I can stay with myself while I face this." Sometimes we get stuck thinking that we need to make the thing outside of us go away when really we need to just learn how to be with ourselves through the hard. Healing is not about never feeling pain again. It's about trusting your capacity to feel, to repair, and to grow through it. And we heal not by avoiding life's edges, but by remembering we can stand in the middle of it.
Yeah. The other thing I would add here, sometimes what's suggested to us humans when we're looking for resources or tools to 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 move forward in our life, we get people who are teaching us to, like you said earlier, pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and just get in there and get it done. But a healthy approach gives people, again, exercise your own autonomy, notice your own intuition about what you need, and notice that entering into a conversation or a challenge is that lean in motivation. Notice that a boundary either pulls back or draws a line. And so you have the freedom to disengage from whatever it is that's out there in the world, or to engage whatever's out there in the world. And you got to decide whether this moment needs a boundary or whether this moment uh, requires you to sit in your own discomfort. And whatever comes as the easiest response may not be the right one. You've got to develop the inner strength and the awareness and a validation for your own inner voice to know which one is the right move to make. And so, Teresa and I are almost never going to tell you what it is that you should do. Rather, we're going to try to help you see that you've got lots of choices on the table. Maybe the answer is just not to take the choice that you've always taken in the past, and maybe to expand yourself. And expanding yourself can be leaning into a hard conversation or challenge, and expanding yourself can be taking a step back and establishing a clear boundary that requires others to engage you in ways that allow you to have self-respect and to seek your own degrees of safety.
I love that. A beautiful way to end this. I think that's all we have.
I got one more thing I did want to throw in,
Yeah.
because I know we talked about this, but I don't.
Oh,
I,
yes.
so currently, the Almost Awakened podcast is housed in the Mormon Discussion channel, and it's because of the work I've done in the past to try to help people to be able to have the tools and resources to deconstruct that unhealthy religious system. But going forward, we're hoping we can get to a day where the Almost Awakened YouTube channel has enough subscribers that allows us to use all of its features as part of YouTube. But what we need to accomplish that is we need you, the folks who watch the Almost Awakened podcast, to go over to the YouTube channel Almost Awakened podcast. And you can see an image of it here on the screen. You'll know by that logo that you found it. if you go in there and subscribe, and the moment that we hit 1,000 subscribers, we will have the ability to have this channel be solely dedicated to the content that Teresa and I are creating. And this will give us a lot more room, because what's happening right now is, number one, the other content that sits on the other channel, the channel you're watching it on right now, most likely, is that the Almost Awakened podcast is a unique audience, and it doesn't get as many views as the other stuff that we create, or I create within the channel with other co-hosts. And that's doing damage to that content, and it's doing damage to this content. And if we can separate those two, I think we'll experience a lot more success with this content reaching a larger audience, and you can be a big help for that. So if every one of you will go over to the Almost Awakened podcast YouTube channel, and you'll hit the subscribe button, and it'll be fun to watch this happen over the next few weeks as we announce this a bunch. But if you'll do that, when we get to 1,000 subscribers, for those of you who really enjoy this content, you'll see this channel essentially focus on that stuff, and it'll give us a chance to reach a lot more folks who need it. So we'd appreciate it if every one of you would do that right now. If you'll just pause the video, go over there, hit subscribe, and if you'll start watching it from there, that'll be helpful to us as well. Anything else you want to say about that?
Nope. I'm excited to get that going, and just thanks everyone for tuning in and supporting us in all the different ways that you support us. And for those of you who donate to the Almost Awakened podcast, we really appreciate that. And yeah, I think that's about it. I think that's it.
All right, folks, we do have opportunities for coaching. If you want to join the support group, or you want one-on-one coaching, you can go to awakenandthrive.org. If you click the support group button, you'll be taken to this page, Religious Deconstruction and Religious Trauma Support Group. Teresa is a coach under her own entity. I'm a coach under my own entity. We are collaborating. So when you click this link, you'll go over to a site that is Monarch Integrative Coaching. But if you register for the support group, again, there's only 2 or 3 spots left for that. And again, just one more reminder, whether it's anxiety, chronic fatigue, religious or spiritual trauma, whether you're interested in that safe and sound protocol that I mentioned earlier that Teresa specializes in, or pain reprocessing, which you specialize in as well, Teresa, or just general trauma or just general coaching, we're here to offer you folks out there the support that you need. And so if anybody does need some additional help, those are lots of opportunities to work with us to get that support. And we'd very much appreciate the chances to be a piece of your journey and to help you. So if anybody needs that, please don't hesitate to visit awakenandthrive.org. And please click like on this video to help us get some reach too. And please leave a comment down below. We'd love to know what you're thinking about the work that we're putting out. These episodes, I think, are a little longer, and we do take things a little slower. And I think a lot of people are very much appreciating this work. We're seeing that in the comments, and we'd like to see your comment as well. So very much appreciate each of you joining us. And thanks, Teresa, for putting this episode together.
Take care, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up